Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome. Welcome back to the second session of the main virtual event of the Dutch Blockchain Week. Excited to have you again with us for the upcoming session. And in this second session, we will dive deep into play to earn, decentralized government, and all kinds of other exciting things, together with three thought leaders flying in virtually from all over the world. Now, we're going to start first with our first speaker, Marlen Komorowski from the Vrije Universiteit Brussel. Marlen, very warm welcome to the Dutch Blockchain Week.
Thank you for having me. Hi.
Now, you are a senior researcher at the VUB, but one of the cool things that we really are enthusiastic about having this conversation with you about. You did a very extensive research with the Dutch government about the decentralized government. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It was a study that we had last year. We finished basically a 5 to 6 month study and worked with the Ministry of the BZK together to help them identify the strategies for the Dutch government for blockchain.
Strategies, and what were some outcomes of this report? Are there already some strategies that are being set up or maybe already being executed?
So what was the goal of the study? We looked a little bit into international case studies for the government and the public sector generally in the opportunities, but also barriers for the implementation of DLT and blockchain. And basically, if it comes to strategies, if we look internationally, there is a wide range from countries who have already published a very detailed strategy and already are making first steps. While with the Dutch government, there's a lot of effort being taken already. So that's really great. And they are developing this at the moment. So they really see where to go next. So I can expect maybe we're going to have a white paper or strategy by the Dutch government soon.
Soon. Wow, that's interesting. Looking forward to that as well. Now, you mentioned that you also did like a global benchmark. You looked at cases of other governments already successfully implementing the technology. Can you name an example?
We had a total of 200 case studies. So we really did a very extensive study on this, completely international. So not only Europe, but worldwide. From these 200 that we analyzed, we basically grouped them to see, okay, where are the most effort being put into by the government at the moment into implementing blockchain into the public sector or governmental services, for example, and map them also across a maturity scale. So we could really see, okay, where are governments worldwide already really far? So where already blockchain implemented, and where are we still in basically a phase of exploration? And if we look at all of these case studies, some of the most mature, and like I said, it's public sector, but also government services. We have the food supply chain and the energy sector as two public sectors with really have made the further steps so far. And then we have areas, for example, if it comes to government spending and assets, there it's still quite early in the mix. So these are maybe some examples where we are in terms of blockchain in the public sector.
And are there some governments that you really can highlight? Governments, for example, in Singapore are already like maturing with the technology, or is that too early to say?
Not necessarily too early to say. I think what also maybe most of the audience members here know is, and the example always used is Estonia, where you really have a lot of governmental services already being implemented and running on the blockchain already. Other countries are still in a very explorative phase, so they mostly give out research funding at the moment, not even prototype level. But actually, there are already a lot of governments and public sectors where it's also driven, especially by the private sector, like food supply. That's, of course, driven by big IT companies developing most of the solutions there. They're really far. And then smaller countries or countries where we especially see that they had to redo a lot of, or still started off with digitization of government services, they could implement blockchain quite early on. So these countries are also quite far if it comes to implementation.
Cool. Now, you mentioned barriers. What kind of barriers did you found when you did this, when you looked at these 200 use cases?
So we had also a survey that we sent around. So maybe some of the crowds here in the audience were so kind to also answer our survey last year. The survey was sent out to blockchain experts, but also to representatives of government in the Netherlands. And there we had a framework to basically look at the innovation adoption rate of the Netherlands for a new technology like blockchain. And in this framework, we asked different areas that are typically highlighted in research. It was a very research-driven approach with a framework. And some of these outcomes integrate that actually found that the ecosystem itself, which could be a very big barrier. So do we have enough blockchain companies in the Netherlands who can support this? Do we have the expertise in the Netherlands and so on? This actually was really highly rated. So there is not necessarily a barrier, but a really good opportunity here. And also the Dutch Blockchain Week and all of these associations that exist in the Netherlands are quite regarded as enablers for blockchain implementation in the government.
Oh, so that's quite good. That's good to hear.
Indeed. If it comes to barriers, on the other hand, we found, for example, that some of these experts saw that there is still a lack of capital and funding into developing these solutions. And other barriers include also skills level on government. So the understanding of decision makers in the government of what blockchain is. And that also stems from my experience of talking at these kind of events with companies, is that for a lot of them, blockchain equals Bitcoin. And if you have this kind of connection and you don't see really the other public values and opportunities that blockchain can create, there is automatically a barrier for implementation as well. And if decision makers don't make a connection between the benefits and really see the technological advantages of blockchain, then you have a big barrier. This is also one of the main findings of the survey.
Yeah, education. I mean, that's one of the most important topics that we also discussed yesterday during our physical event. That still, most people, we are actually in this filter bubble, right? We all think that everybody knows what blockchain means, what Bitcoin means, the clear difference between both of them. But when you look outside of this filter bubble, it's clear that still most people just don't know. And there lies a huge opportunity there. But you also... Sorry?
So I got a lot of questions about, but what about the energy consumption? Yeah. And this is really about just one certain type of blockchain technology, which is not necessarily what other blockchain technologies enables you to do. And if you always combine it with this idea, but we are, I don't want to harm the environment, so I will never look at blockchain, then you have, of course, a big barrier for implementation.
Yeah. Although what we also hear quite often is like most people, they just don't care. They're like, as long as the technology is there to be used, and they don't need to see all the technical details of the technology as long as it's being used for what it's being used for. And that's why I think it's very interesting to hear from your side that also the research was based on 200 use cases that you can actually show to, for example, the Dutch government, like, hey, here you see some really, cool use cases that you maybe can copy, like, why not copy them for your own government. But you also touched upon the financial side. And were you do you mean like the investments being done in startups and scale-ups within the Web3 ecosystem, or are these the investments that should be done by, for example, the Dutch government in the technology?
Well, basically, it's both sides. It's both sides of the coin. Also, from the private sector, that's what the experts said, that there's still not enough investment being done for startups to be created or to go to scale-up level, but also for governments. And mostly this is also because, and there it comes back to this idea that you need a strategy within the government in order to enable funding and have funding available for these kind of solutions. And there it comes really about opportunities quite often, because if you have a running system, and that's something that really blocks changes in the public sector. If you have a system that works and it does basically your bare minimum, it's really hard to switch to new systems. And that's basically because blockchain really needs to be from the ground up. It really would have to change a lot of the digital environment in order to work and make a change in a system. And this really would mean a large investment upfront, but which maybe saves a lot in the future. And that's a little bit this idea of a short-term and long-term thinking about investment in the government. If you want to invest and then really on the short term see something changes, that's really difficult with blockchain because it really needs to be from the ground up in the system that you want to change.
Now, and on this short term, were there any recommendations or already actions being made available that we can learn from this report, or already from the government that made, that announced that they will actually take action on the short term on one of the subjects or one of the actions that you proposed?
So I had three main recommendations. One I coined bring public value into the focus and local context. So basically to really show, and that's a little bit what you already mentioned around education, to really also show the public value. Because if it comes to the blockchain community, it's really driven about KPIs. Okay, our system is going to be faster, our system is going to be more secure, and so on. But if you want to convince the government or public sector to implement blockchain, you also have to talk about the value, public value it can create. So this includes, for example, that you increase public integrity of your service, that you strengthen democratic values of the service or the system that you're changing, or that you increase collaboration. If you highlight these kind of areas, you can also convince the public sector or governments to implement blockchain.
Yeah.
And
blockchain.
Yes. Sorry. Second one was that it needs to be based on really a strategic decision making, because the only value of blockchain quite often is if you have a very complex system with a lot of different players. So in order to convince everyone to get on board, if you want to change a system, it really needs to be strategic from the beginning, getting everyone on board and so on. That was our second recommendation. And the third that a little bit leans into this is if blockchain is being implemented, and that's what we learned from the 200 cases, you really need to involve all of these stakeholders and give all of them a voice in order to make it work. If you overlook certain players that in the end are needed for successful implementation, also the changes won't happen.
Now, you have been advising the government, and I can see that if you look back to like the first, the first elements of the blockchain technology, the first thoughts that actually, made blockchain technology as it was, decentralized. Is it not conflicting with the idea of a centralized government? I'm curious to learn from your side, how did the Dutch government or governments responded to that? Because if you look back to like how, Satoshi Nakamoto, mentioned it in this white paper, but also, the other elements that made blockchain technology as it is, it's really focused on decentralizing. It's really focused on removing power from these centralized institutions. Was there any response from the Dutch government on this idea?
They were really interested in these ideas. So in the end of our report, we have a section about a little bit these conflicting ideas around blockchain. What if, on the one hand, there are ideas of, okay, we take power away from the government, but in theory, government should be in favor of this because they want to be more democratic. It's a public value, right? On the other hand, we see partly also ideas around, okay, but do we maybe move with blockchain in the background into an even more authoritarian system in government? So there were ideas, okay, if you run everything on the blockchain, you might have also issues on being able to control everything that everyone does and see and put value to it, basically. So like social coins of your behavior, and you might compare this to the Chinese system. So there are also debates around this, and we basically picked each of these discussions and a little bit talk about the pros and cons and what this means for the government. And they were really interested in this. What they're going to make out of this, that's up to them. Because we don't give like concrete advice, but we say be aware of these discussions, and that's how you can handle them. And I invite everyone to read it in the report.
But there were no follow-up actions already being announced. It's just like, they're now reading a report and trying to look at, how to implement this in the... Was it only the national government, or was it also for the more local or the regional governments?
It was the Ministry for Binnenlandse Zaken. So okay. I guess...
Internal Affairs.
Exactly, for internal affairs. And I think that's also one of the issues here, because you have all of the competencies across all of the ministries, then you have different competencies for change on regional and local and city levels, of course. But if I remember correctly, basically they used my report to do first stakeholder consultations, where they also talk to local governments. And hopefully out of these discussions at some point, a real strategy that involves all of the stakeholders, like we advised, will follow.
Now, you did a little benchmark, looked at all the use cases, I guess all around the world, governments implementing blockchain. Was there a surprising use case in the Netherlands already from a Dutch government implementing blockchain on a national or regional or local level you can share with us?
There were, I think we covered 2 Dutch ones. None of them got very far, unfortunately. One was around education, and one was for also social coins in a city in the Netherlands. The details I would have to look up, but there are at least 2 included. But compared maybe to other countries, there's still quite little to explore in the Netherlands. So.
For sure, and we see already quite some interesting initiatives, but indeed there's still a lot more to explore when it comes to education, when it comes to implementation. What is next? Will it be like a next phase in a research, or for around the implementation of blockchain technology in the Netherlands, or is it now finished and you're continuing with another research project?
So for us, what we work on currently is to do academic publications based on our data that we gathered within the project. So there will be 2 articles coming out next year for that. For our research perspective, we really saw that there is still a lot to do, because we're a social science research institute. So if you look at the moment at the academic research field, a lot comes from computer sciences to really look at the systems. And we took this angle of, okay, what does social science tell us? And that's why this unique idea of, okay, really look at the public value and the stakeholders and the mapping and so on of use cases. So there is still a lot of research to do. We currently look a little bit into blockchain and the media sector in terms of, for example, fake news. So this is some of the areas we work on at Emacs VUB. And we also are always interested in working on new projects and proposals. So if anyone wants to team up on research projects, let me know.
If somebody is listening now in the audience, or maybe later with the recording, they can reach out to you. Well, Marlen, many thanks for joining us. Really enjoyed this discussion. Good luck also with the further steps in the research. Definitely going to read the report again. I'm really curious to learn, what kind of recommendations you made more. We can maybe also as foundation discuss with the government. So, but for now, many thanks for joining us from Brussels, and wishing you a great day ahead.
Thank you very much.